Dr. Talley, before you leave your microphone, would you say the first word to that song in the Hebrew accent that I can never approximate?
דרור יקרא.
Do you hear that? Those are two R's in a row. Do it again.
דרור יקרא.
So what it means is liberty. I would say drawer, like a New Jersey American. But drawer means liberty. And the word is resonant. So this particular song talks about Shabbat, and it says, call liberty for, it says ben and bat for daughter and son. The word dror is most familiar to those of us who know the Hebrew from Leviticus 25, because that sentence is on the Liberty Bell. Like, ukaratem dror ba'aretz, proclaim liberty throughout the land. It's an important word to the Jewish people. And what is the holiday that's approaching? It's the holiday that celebrates that liberty. So, given all the constellations of these themes, I want to reflect on something which is, well, maybe peripherally related or maybe absolutely related, which is the relationship we Jews have with tyranny. It's mixed. It's mixed. It's not always bad. Sometimes it works. Most times it doesn't. Of course, the Passover story, the one we'll be telling in a few days, is infamous because the Pharaoh of Passover was one of the most brutal tyrants we've ever encountered. Now, as the story tells it, though, and you have to go way back to Joseph, when Joseph actually gets to Egypt and is thrown in jail, he manages to manipulate the system and get himself out of jail and work the autocrat for his benefit. He rises up to be almost number two to the Pharaoh. But now Joseph uses his skills to get back at his brothers. When they arrive seeking respite from the famine in Egypt, he uses those powers and he looks at them and he says, sell me into slavery, will you? Well, guess what? I'm going to make you jump through hoops until I give you what you're asking for. But, of course, things went famously wrong for the Israelites shortly after Joseph was gone and his friendly Pharaoh disappeared from the scene. The text, and again, another classic text, if you know Torah, this text is resonant. Vayakom melech hadash al Mitzrayim, asher lo yada et Yosef. And it's a resonant, I'll translate in a second, it's a resonant phrase for Jewish people whenever they find themselves under the rule of someone, of a particular autocrat, who's not disposed favorably for them. It means there arose a new king in Egypt who knew not Joseph. Pharaoh's take on the Israelites, now this new Pharaoh, the one who doesn't know Joseph, is a classic riff on the anti-Semitic trope that we've come to know. He says, this people who lives apart is becoming too numerous. They might rise up and take over. Well, we know the rest of the story. And this is a paradigmatic example of what happens to the Jews when our well-being rests in the hands of an autocrat. It only takes whim, or in this case, secession, to upend the well-being we've had. There's another story that we just heard a couple of months ago, which is the story of Esther, the Purim story. And it kind of inverts, if you will, the Egyptian story. Haman manipulates the autocrat, a doltish tyrant, Ahasuerus is just that, to get his way to persecute the Jews. But now Esther saves her people because she out-manipulates. Now remember, the Purim story is famous because God is not mentioned and we don't get any sense of God intervening. So it's really a diaspora story that comes out of a sense of realism that the writers had. Esther is unusual because it's a unicorn story. Esther out-manipulates Haman and saves her people. However, had Mordecai not learned of the plot, had Esther not won the beauty pageant, had she not risked her life to save her people, had Haman not fallen for the trap she built for him, had Ahasuerus not been taken by her beauty, none of it would have happened. So because it's such an outlier, it points to the risks of tyranny. All could have been lost. So again, our tradition uses a story to show that when authority rests in the hands of one, things could go dramatically wrong rapidly. Now, over the previous 2,000 years of recorded history, the biblical model, those two stories, have actually proven prophetic. In the 12th century, centuries after the golden age of Spain, when Jewish fortunes were going well, the autocrats of Spain and Portugal welcomed the inquisitors into their midst, and things went drastically wrong. Jewish life under the Kaisers in Germany and then the failed Weimar democracy brought a notable period of Jewish prosperity. Freud, Einstein, Reform Judaism. But Germany's last autocrat, whose name I'm not going to mention, obviously was devastating. And Jews now, interestingly, have returned in multitudes to a democratic Germany, and it has welcomed those Jews. In the last century, after pretty good decades under the Shah in Iran, hardly a democratic leader, things deteriorated rapidly when the autocratic Ayatollahs took over, and now we're, of course, reaping the benefits of that. Russia's brief democratic summer between autocracies is another example. Soviet anti-Semitism, a problem. Tolerant glasnost, possibility. Autocratic Putin, not so good again. Could give you whiplash. But that's why it's fair to say that our relationship with tyranny, can't say good or bad, it's better to say it's complicated. But to be honest, if you look at the long arc of Jewish history, mostly bad. Interestingly, more than most other religions, Judaism has, for at least the last 2,000 years, been uniquely democratic. To mix a couple of metaphors, but really the manifestation of democracy in Judaism is notable. And even before that, when we had kings, there was always this strain of resistance to an absolutist monarchy. After all, Deuteronomy famously said that if you desire a king, okay, fine. You shouldn't, but if you do, fine. When a king is seated on his royal throne, he shall have a copy of the teaching, in Hebrew Torah, written for him on a scroll. Let it remain with him, and let him read it all the days of his life, so that he may learn to revere Adonai his God, to observe faithfully every word of this teaching, Torah, as well as these laws. Thus, this is in Torah, he will not act haughtily toward his fellows or deviate from instructions to the right or to the left. The Jewish people never went for an absolutist pope-like figure. We never had a chief rabbi over everything. The very nature of the rabbinate itself is radically democratic and meritocratic. Anyone can be a rabbi, literally anyone. The only requirement, scholarship, knowledge, learning, maybe even a bit of charisma. Over 1,000 years ago, the greatest rabbinic academies in Babylonia and in the land of Israel were famous for their debate and their disagreement, their discourse and their dialogue. And importantly, and notably, minority voices were recorded and honored in our tradition for thousands of years and still are. Now, to be sure, democracy is not perfect. Anti-Semitism often percolates up to the surface, and all too often it makes life miserable for our people. And tragically, sadly, this country is no exception. Few of us are old enough to remember Father Charles Coughlin, but you've maybe heard of him. He was infamous for his anti-Semitic screeds in the 1930s, where he offered them on nationally syndicated radio, so they were heard by a wide spectrum of Americans, and he found resonance. And of course, our present times are seeing a rise of anti-Semitism on the right and on the left. So democracy does have cracks, no question, and they allow often those cracks, the darkness of Jew hatred, to percolate through. However, I think it's safe to say that by a wide margin, democracy in all of its forms, anywhere it's manifest in the world, has created more opportunity for Jews than any other system of human governance that has ever existed. That, I think, is a statement that is true. And it's precisely because democracy is not about the rule of one. It is about the rule of law. And this is important Democracy is not about the rule of, it's obvious and it's important. It's not about the rule of one, it is about the rule of law. So when we gather around our tables for Passover and remember our famous first story of tyrannical oppression, I believe that among the things we talk about at our Passover Seder, we have to be talking about democracy in this country. But first, I want to lay out some of the cornerstones of democracy. First and foremost, free and fair elections. This is where the will of the people is realized and our chosen representatives are given power. We, as Jews, cannot afford to let the current debate go unnoticed. The debate about gerrymandering, the debate about voter ID laws, all of it has to be resolved, and we have to ensure this in a way that increases voter participation, not decreases voter participation, and that we make sure that we have fair electoral boundaries. Current attempts all around to manipulate either of those for partisan advantage undermines democracy. Second, the rule of law is greater than any individual. No one in democracy, that's what democracy is all about, is above the law. Obviously, not you, not I, neither is a president. The authority of our courts is binding. The decisions of our legislatures must compel us all. 3, separation of powers. We all learned this in 7th grade. I wrote about Mr. Bellomo, my favorite 7th grade teacher. Our democracy rests on the independence of these 3 pillars: our courts, our legislatures, our executives. And I use plural because it means state and national. In this country, Congress has clear responsibilities for governance, and any failure to assert those powers is a failure of its duties. And yes, I am indicting our current Congress. Our courts are equally responsible, and we must all be held to those standards. When one or another branch of government surrenders its authority to another, making no bones about it, democracy is threatened. Number 4, human rights. Democracies do value human rights. Do we fall short? Obviously, but we aspire to uphold the human rights of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, and the rights afforded to citizens. There are times when the exercise of those freedoms might make us uncomfortable. Freedom of speech is a tough one. There are a lot of people saying things that we don't like, but freedom of speech means they have the right to say it. Nevertheless, democracies preserve those rights even when some don't like them. And notably, in democracies, even non-citizens have human rights. And finally, democracy depends upon respectful discourse. Democracy thrives on respectful discourse. And again, we know that, we Jews, because our sacred texts, from the Bible to the present day, are characterized by disagreement and discord. We are the people who are famous for arguments. But demonizing those with whom we disagree neither serves the Jewish people, nor does it serve democracy. Canceling the voices with whom we disagree is unacceptable. Democracy thrives on compromise. There will be times when key issues are not resolved in the manner that you and I would desire. That will happen. And when it happens, we can either accept the outcome or we can work within the law to change the outcome we don't like. That is legal, and we do it all the time. So I want to be clear. On the eve of Passover, so to speak, on Shabbat HaGadol, when we remember what our story we tell about tyranny, I think it's critical that we talk about how important strong democracy is to us Jews and to Americans and to the world. We have to be its most strident advocates because we know what it means to us. So here's an invitation I'm going to toss out to you for you to consider at your Passover Seder. And obviously it might take a little preparing of the people and making sure that the conversation remains civil. But I want you to add these 4 questions. Obviously, 4 is a significant number for Passover. They're going to show up on the screen for folks who are online. You can email me. I'll send you my copy if you can't write quickly enough. The first question, why is democracy important for Jews? I think that's a good conversation to have at a Passover Seder. The second, what's the state of American democracy today? People will disagree. Some will say perfect, others will say not so good. It's important to have a conversation about that. What are some of the specific threats that are currently challenging American democracy? They're out there. They're working from all sides. We have to be vigilant to what's happening. And then finally, the last one I think is the most important one. All of us vote. All of us can write letters. All of us can advocate. All of us can take action. We can join organizations that are involved in the fights that we believe in. What can we do to make democracy stronger? We can take the actions that make a difference. It is, I think, a discussion that is one of the most important conversations we can be having at this time on the 250th anniversary of the United States of America and we as Jews. And I truly believe that having that conversation at our Passover Seder around the table will make those Seders a feast of freedom. After all, that's what we call Passover.